I am a sunrise of love. Strange that hundreds of birds don't follow me, pecking songs of my white shadow. It must be that they are surrounding in a vigil of clouds, the immense daylight where my soul advances. Strange that pale daisies don't carry me on the amorous route that my wings have taken. It must be that they are crying to their saddest sister, who in silence has gone at the hour of dawn. Strange that the lightest of those breezes that lulled me to sleep in infancy doesn't dress me as a bride. It must be that among the trees it is showing my love the innocent paths where I walked, chaste. Strange that the dew doesn't sprinkle its emotions at me in drops where the morning peaks smiling. It must be that by the furrows of past anguish my deceptions bathe with generous water. I am a sunrise of love. In me hang songs and clusters of petals and many white dreams and winged emotions. Strange that man doesn't understand me, troubled by the simple hand that gathered my soul. It must be that in him night unleaves more slowly, or perhaps he doesn't understand pure emotion.
Before I read the prayer, I'd like to lift up two events that have unfortunate anniversaries at this time. It was on August 11th and 12th, 2017, last year. A group of white nationalists marched on the University of Virginia campus, and then the next day in Charlottesville, Virginia, which resulted in a riot and the death of one observer, Heather Heyer, and two policemen who later died in a helicopter crash, Jay Cullen and Burke Bates. All three a reminder of the cost of the persistent hate, fear, and racism that's still alive today. I'd also like to pay tribute to those that perished during and after Hurricane Maria tore through the Caribbean last year around this time. Over 2,975 in Puerto Rico, 65 in Dominica, 5 in the Dominican Republic, 4 in the United States, 3 in Haiti, 2 in Guadeloupe, and 3 in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Thankfully, my immediate family fared well, but those living in poverty that survived were and still are devastated. And my heart cries out for them and their families that they struggle to find relief. I'm going to share an excerpt from another poem by Puerto Rican poet Julia de Burgos. It is titled Farewell in Welfare Island. It has to be from here, right this instance, my cry into the world. Life has somewhere forgotten and sought refuge in depths of tears and sorrows over this vast empire of solitude and darkness. Where is the voice of freedom? Freedom to laugh, to move, without the heavy phantom of despair. Where is the form of beauty, unshaken in its veil, simple and pure? Where is the warmth of heaven, pouring its streams of love in broken spirits? It has to be from here, right this instance, my cry into the world, my cry that is no more mine, but hers and his forever. The comrades of my silence, the phantoms of my grave, it has to be from here, forgotten but unshaken, among comrades of silence, deep into Welfare Island, my farewell to the world.
Well, welcome. It's good to see y'all. I have a story. It's a wonderful story, I think, because it's a story about me, my favorite subject. It's actually a story of my ancestors. Do you know what ancestors are? The people that came before you. Thank you very much, yes. And it could be your parents, I guess, are kind of your ancestors. our grandparents, or maybe great-great-grandparents, and people well before that. Well, the ancestors I'm talking about are much older for me. They're a group of people. They're a group of people called the Taínos. The Taínos were people that lived around the Caribbean, around Puerto Rico, Cuba, Dominican Republic, in that area. And they were there when Columbus landed in that area. Do you remember when Columbus landed? What year was that? Anybody? Anybody been to history class? 1492, a long time ago, Christopher Columbus landed in the Caribbean area and met the Taino Indians there. They had been there for about 2,000 years or so, living in that area. Unfortunately, after he landed, things didn't go so well for the Taino Indians. They did not last as a people much longer, unfortunately due to disease and slavery and other things. However, they did leave behind a culture, a heritage that even now we still have some semblance of. They actually left behind a lot of words that they use for a lot of the food and things that they have. They had canoes. They gave us the word for canoes. They gave us the word for bananas, coconut, cocoa, yams, hammock, all those things that they were using in the Caribbean area. Those words still live today in the English language, at least, and other languages. They also gave us something very popular in Texas, which we couldn't live without, and that's barbacoa. That is their word, which became barbecue, of course, in English. Modern Puerto Ricans, like myself, my family's from Puerto Rico, we're a mix of the Taino, African, and Spain and Portugal kind of areas, and so we're kind of a little melting pot there of different cultures. So that's what we are today. So my story is a creation story from the Taino Indians in the Caribbean area. Do you know a creation story, what that refers to? No, the Bible has a very famous creation story. Adam and Eve, I'm sure you've heard of. That's a creation story, but other cultures also have stories of how life started and how things got created. So the Taínos also had their own story, so I'm going to read that here, and it's about their island, which they called Boriken, which later became Puerto Rico. So you can turn. So in the beginning of the world, there was no water anywhere on earth. There was only a tall mountain that stood alone on a wide desert plain. There were no green plants, there were no flowers. All the people lived on top of this big mountain. One day, a child went walking on the dry land below the mountains, and as he bent down over the ground looking for food, something floated by on the wind. He reached out and caught it in his hand. It was a seed, a small brown seed, and he put the seed in his pouch. The next day, he went walking, and again he found something as it floated by on the wind. It was another seed. Day by day, he kept gathering the seeds and putting them in his pouch. It could not hold anymore. It was getting so full. And the child said to himself, I will plant these seeds at the top of our mountain. So he planted the seeds and waited. One morning, a tiny green leaf appeared. The child watched. From under the ground, a forest began to grow high on top of the mountain. All the people came to see. It was a forest of many colored flowers, a magic garden of green leaves and thick branches. And the child was very happy. And that was the beginning of the first forest there for the people. In the middle of the forest, at the foot of the tallest tree, there grew a vine that wrapped itself around the tree. And from that vine grew a flower more beautiful than all the rest, a bright flower with golden petals. You see it there? It was very unusual. From that flower, something new appeared in the forest. It looked like a little ball. Look, cried the child, something is growing out of the flower. It's really big and orange. All the people gathered around to watch. The ball grew larger and larger until it became a great yellow globe that shone like the sun. Even as they walked on the dry land far below, people could see it shining on top of the mountain. It's getting bigger and bigger. One woman said, if you put your ear next to the ball, you can hear strange noises coming from inside. The people listened. Strange sounds and murmuring could be heard, but nobody knew what was hidden inside. The people were afraid. After that, they all stayed away. Even the child stayed away. One day, a man walking on the desert plain saw the golden ball. He said that if that shining ball were mine, I would have the power of the sun. I could light up the sky or make darkness fall, and he ran toward it, climbing up the rocky mountainside. On the other side of the mountain, another man saw the globe, and he also said, I want that thing for myself. It will give me great powers. He too began to run. Each one climbed quickly, for each one found a footpath that led to the tree. Uh-oh. Now the trouble's starting. So both of them found a great big ball, and they were reaching for it at the same time. But what they found was not really a ball. It was the fruit of the flower, something we call calabaza, which in English would be pumpkin. Very good. Thank you. So the two men began to fight and argue. It's mine, said one. No, it's mine, said the other. So each man grabbed the pumpkin, and they pushed and pulled, and they rolled and round the floor until, you guessed it, it broke. It fell out of their hands and broke, and it began to roll down the mountain faster and faster until it crashed into a sharp rock and fell apart. So what do you think is inside? Water, yeah. Waves of water poured out of the pumpkin. The water bubbled and foamed. The waves began to cover the earth, flooding the desert plain, rising higher and higher. For it was the sea that had been hidden inside the pumpkin. Out came the creatures, whales, dolphins, crabs, and sunfish. All the people ran to the top of the mountain to hide in the forest of green leaves. There was so much water, it surrounded the whole area and left a tiny little island. So will the earth be covered, they cried? Higher and higher the waters kept coming up. But when the water reached the edge of the forest, the little boy had planted, it stopped. So all that was left was a little patch of green. The people peeked out from behind the leaves, and what did they see? Small streams running from the trees, a beach of golden sand, and the wide open ocean sparkling all around them. Now the people could drink from the cool streams and splash in the rippling waves, and now they could gather fish from the flowing tides and plant their crops. The child laughed and sang as the sun shone down and breezes blew through the green leaves and rustled the many-colored flowers. Water had come to the earth, and that is how the Taínos say, between the sun and the sparkling blue sea, their island home, Boriquen, came to be. So I would say the end, but it was actually the beginning.
Good morning. This
It
is
was
the
the beginning
prologue
of the
to the
island
book
of Puerto
When I
Rico.
Was Puerto Rican by
That's my
Esmeralda
story of
Santiago,
my
and it goes by the
ancestors by
title,
Taino.
How
Hope
to
you
Eat
like
a
that.
Guava.
We've now seen
There are
you out
guavas
at
at the shop
playground.
and stop. I pick one the size of a tennis ball and finger the prickly stem end. It feels familiarly bumpy and firm. The guava is not quite ripe. The skin is still a dark green. I smell it and I imagine a pink, pale center, the seeds tightly embedded in the flesh. A ripe guava is yellow, although some varieties have a pink tinge. Excuse me. Its heart is bright pink and almost solid with seeds. The most delicious part of the guava surrounds the tiny seeds. If you don't know how to eat a guava, the seeds end up in the crevices between your teeth. When you bite into a ripe guava, your teeth must grip the bumpy surface and sink into the thick, edible skin without hitting the center. It takes experience to do this. It's quite tricky to determine how far beyond the skin the seeds begin. Some years ago, when the rains have been plentiful and the nights cool, you can bite into a guava and not find many seeds. The guava bushes grow close to the ground, their branches laden with green and yellow fruit that seem to ripen overnight. These guavas are large and juicy, almost seedless, their roundness enticing you to have one more, just one more, because next year the rains may not come. A green guava is sour and hard. You bite into it at its widest point because it's easier to grasp with your teeth. You hear the skin, meat, and seeds crunching inside your head, while the inside of your mouth explodes in little spurts of sour. You grimace. Your eyes water, and your cheeks disappear as your lips purse into a tight O. But you have another and another, enjoying the crunchy sounds, the acid taste, the greedy texture of the unripe center. At night, your mother makes you drink castor oil, which she says tastes better than a green guava. That's when you know for sure that you are still a child and she has stopped being one. I had my last guava the day that we left Puerto Rico. It was large and juicy, almost red in the center, and so fragrant that I didn't want to eat it because I would lose the smell. All the way to the airport, I scratched at it with my front teeth, making little dents in the skin, chewing small pieces so that I could feel the texture against my tongue, the tiny pink pellets of sweet. Today, I stand before a stack of dark green guavas, each perfectly round and hard, each $1.59. The one in my hand is tempting. It smells faintly of late summer afternoons and hopscotch under the mango tree. But this is autumn in New York, and I am no longer a child. The guava joins its sisters under the harsh fluorescent lights of the exotic fruit display. I push my cart away toward the apples and pears of my adulthood, their nearly seedless ripeness, predictable and bittersweet.
We all want to feel loved and cared for by a community. Unfortunately, as a nation of many cultures, we are a melting pot of ideals and customs that sometimes set us apart. Yet the power of diversity is real, transcending, and ultimately spiritual. As Unitarian Universalists, we proudly fight for social justice. This is a trait that keeps me involved with this church, especially when dealing with racism and diversity. I am pleased and honored to be able to share my Latino perspective with you in the hope that I can contribute to the ongoing dialogue on racism and diversity here in our church community. My Puerto Rican heritage is fairly unique to the United States, but the struggle to fit in is very common across America's immigrants. That is what I want to address here today, the shared dream of crossing over into the predominantly white America, which I refer to as crossover dreams. Puerto Ricans became citizens of the United States by the Jones Act of 1917, against the wishes of most Puerto Ricans who wanted independence at that time. Coincidentally, the Jones Act came just in time for the United States to draft Puerto Ricans for World War I and every war thereafter. My two brothers, my father, and many uncles are among those Puerto Ricans who have proudly served in the U.S. military over the years. In the Vietnam War alone, 48,000 Puerto Ricans served, including my two brothers. We are well vested in this country that has taken on the responsibility of the Puerto Rican people. If you're not familiar with Puerto Rican culture, you probably would not be alone. It's a small island, roughly 100 miles wide, 30 miles high. It makes it slightly smaller than Delaware and Rhode Island combined. However, the population of Puerto Rico is over 3 million, making it somewhere around the 30th most populated U.S. state or territory. That does not include the over 5 million people of Puerto Rican descent living in the United States. That would include me. My mother emigrated to the New York City area in the early 1950s. Our traditions came from my mother's simple country life in Puerto Rico, but became quickly influenced by the culture of the United States that we were now being raised in, especially through the media. Movies have played a strong influence in my life, and I know it is for a lot of people, especially those that are marginalized. We find much inspiration and hope from seeing our story played out on the screen. I can go through a long list of influential films for the Latino community, like Selena, Stand and Deliver, La Bamba, and others that serve to inspire and give us hope that we too can succeed here in the United States. It is all we have at times. For me, there were 3 movies that would impact me greatly. The first was the comedic film, Papi, by Arthur Hiller, made in 1969, starring Alan Arkin in the title role. It is an outrageous story of a New York Puerto Rican father trying to convince his two young boys of a scheme to fake being Cuban immigrants by floating into Miami on tubes so that they could get a better life being adopted as refugees. At the movie's close, the family comes to realize that the love they have for each other and for their culture is more important and non-transferable. They did not want to lose their identity in order to gain economically. The movie is otherwise a little crude, a little dated, but the message always stuck with me. There is such a power in keeping your identity alive and honoring the traditions of that identity, despite living in a different culture. The second movie was the classic West Side Story, made in 1961 by Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins, featuring the wonderful music, which you've heard two songs today by Leonard Bernstein and lyrics by Stephen Sondheim. In this movie, we see the struggle of Puerto Rican immigrants trying to fit into white America of New York City in the 1950s, of course set to the Romeo and Juliet story of Shakespeare. The classic rooftop scene, though, is what I remember most and what sticks out to me with the song America. In it, we see the give and take of loving all the new conveniences of life in the United States, but yet missing all the beauty and culture of the island of Puerto Rico. As the singers go back and forth between the two sides, you see the struggle playing out of trying to fit into this foreign culture. A culture that is obvious about its dislike of you, a white America that has trouble accepting people of color and accepting them into their culture. As an aside, it is disheartening that both those movies featured non-Latinos and Latinas in the starring roles. Alan Arkin and Natalie Wood, though they did great, are not Puerto Rican. Though I thought so watching as a young kid. I bought into it. But the most redeeming quality of both those movies, and the common link between both of those, is the wonderfully multi-talented Rita Moreno. She was in both of those movies. She was born and raised in Humacao, Puerto Rico, and moved to New York City when she was 5 years old. She remains a shining star for Puerto Ricans and has represented the island with such grace, love, and humanity. She is one of the idols of our larger Latino culture, a role model for making it in the United States, a role model for our crossover dreams. She gives Latinos and Latinas hope of not only what is possible, but what is within our rights as people living here in the United States. This is the immigrant story, the rags to riches story that inspires us here and leads foreigners to our shores. The immigrant story is the story of the United States. We have seen it played out from the very beginning to now. Esmeralda Santiago, a Puerto Rican author, wrote a wonderful memoir in 1988 of her experience emigrating to the United States called When I Was Puerto Rican. The reading earlier that Ruth read is the prologue to her book. Her story is a bitter, sad, but ultimately uplifting journey from poverty in Puerto Rico to success as a writer in New York City. Her guava story is poignant not for only its amazing description, but for the allegory to the loss of her connection to Puerto Rican culture. As an adult living in the United States, so far from Puerto Rican culture, her connection to the island and to the culture lessens over time, just as the taste of the guavas off the tree. This is important for anyone to understand about immigrants in the United States, just what it means to leave your culture behind. Though immigrants come looking to gain better opportunities and freedoms, they are leaving behind their culture, their homeland, their families, their identity. It is not an easy thing to do to lose your sense of self and try to find a new identity. I challenge white America to leave the confines of their safety here and try to live in a foreign country and see if they could thrive in that environment. I would imagine that exercise would go a long way to gain more understanding of the plight of the foreigners trying to live here today. We have seen the immigrant story, the story of crossing over to the American dream played out from almost every country in Europe. First the English, French, and Spanish, then Irish, Germans, and Swedish, and Italians, and Polish, and so on. Each group went through the cycle of alienation and persecution for their language, their food, their appearance, and their culture. Each wave would struggle through horrible living conditions, terrible work conditions, and alienation. But each would ultimately integrate into America. These immigrants with nothing to lose and everything to gain achieved a success that was hard fought, but made this country stronger and richer and secured their future generations. They had become a part of America. They crossed over to the American dream. But it was a dream mostly shared with white America. The African Americans who have been here since the 1600s, the indigenous peoples of the Americas who were always here, Asian peoples and the hybrid peoples of Latin America were not included wholeheartedly. Racism, prejudice, fear, hatred have kept them from realizing the same dream. Crossing over became a much longer and more difficult dream to realize. I can only imagine what it is like for white America. Mostly every TV show, every movie, every magazine features white America. You are included right from birth. You see examples of yourself everywhere you turn. The fireman, policeman, the doctor, teacher, engineers, architects, so on. I'm a big fan of film entertainment, and I get a lot of joy of watching the old movies on Turner Classic Movies. But, I'm hardly ever represented there. It takes a great deal of patience to overlook that and see beyond that. I'm relegated to only imagining myself in these places and times, even though people of color were clearly there at the time. Being the only Latino, Latina person of color wherever you go gets tiresome after a while. That is why we are so happy to see each other when we can. It is a joy to see another Latino or Latina in places where we are so poorly represented, because it validates my experience, validates the years of study, the years of work, and the years of isolation. White America takes that for granted. I know the struggle it took for Rita Moreno to be the only real Puerto Rican in a story about Puerto Ricans, in not one but several of her movies. I know the struggle of Roberto Clemente, an amazing Major League Baseball player and humanitarian from Puerto Rico, who faced racial slurs while he played baseball in the 1950s and 60s because of his dark skin color. They called him words he didn't even understand. He didn't even understand English. I know the struggle of my own mother and her generation being forced to move from their home and their birthplace in Puerto Rico because of disappearing job opportunities. I know the struggles of the massive immigrants from all over the Caribbean and Latin America looking now to find a better life for themselves here in the United States, fleeing political and social unrest. The same struggle that so many African Americans, Native Americans, and Asians and other people of color have been enduring here for some time now. Julia de Burgos, whose poetry I featured today, immigrated to New York City from Puerto Rico in the 1940s. Her poetry was not recognized widely, sadly, until after her death in 1953 at 39 years old. Hers was a sad and tortured life, despite the depth and beauty of her poetry. She could never reconcile the struggles that she faced, fighting for independence, women's rights, and for her culture. She succumbed to depression and loneliness. And this is the other side of being an immigrant here in the United States. The dark path you can take, never being able to realize your dreams and never feeling that you fit in. In my life, it has been so important to find people to inspire and push me forward, many of which I have already made mention of, but another of those heroes is Ruben Blades, or Ruben Blades. Ruben's a native of Panama. He started his career in music in the 1970s with the Fania record label out of New York City, which was the prominent label for the birth of salsa music. Salsa music was an American form of music born and bred from all the multicultural elements in New York City at the time. And he was at the forefront of that genre as a premier songwriter and singer. He gave voice to the oppressed and brought light to their struggles by telling their stories in his music. He would speak of unity and allegiance and of supporting one another. He spoke of fighting oppression and, most importantly, of honoring one's culture and traditions. His music was so affirming to me. I'm not sure I can fully relate the importance of that as I struggled to find myself as a young man. Rubens' other career, and he had many, because he was very multi-talented, was acting, which you may know him from that as well. He acted in movies like Milagro, Beanfield War, Lemon Sisters, Predator 2, and was recently in the cast of Fear the Walking Dead. He's had a long career in film as well. But the one role that sticks out to me is my third most influential movie called Crossover Dreams, and that came out in 1985. It told the story of a Latino trying to make it musically in the pop world by leaving his Latino roots behind. Well, eventually the Latino roots would win out in the end, but the movie and title always stuck with me. What do we give up to try and make it here in America? How much of our identity do we have to sacrifice? It seems like other immigrants gave up quite a lot. And it seems to me that African Americans and Latin Americans are somewhat less willing to give up their culture. And that has made the transition all the harder for us, I think. My favorite song of Rubens, among many, is called Patria, which we heard earlier, which is motherland or homeland in English. It has become the second national anthem of Panama since its release in 1988 off his Antecedente album. In it, he describes the story of a young boy asking an older man about the significance of the word patria. The older man then relates to the boy with his soul in his throat that patria is so many beautiful things, like that old tree that speaks its poems to us, like the love that guards us when abuela passes away. It's the walls of the barrio. It's what you hold in your heart when you lose everything. It is the martyrs shouting flag and country. It is not memorized lessons by dictators. Patria is not defined by those that try to eliminate hope. Patria is the sentimental feelings carried by the elders. It is the arrival of spring. It is the laughter of a young child. I answer you, young man, patria is so many beautiful things. When you can begin to understand what Rubens is trying to relate, you can begin to understand what it means for Latin Americans. Latinos have such love and connection to their homeland. They are not coming here to commit crimes, to steal, to rob, to rape, or take advantage. Being here is a desperate attempt to find a better life for them and their children. If they could stay where they were, they would. Many still want to return once they can secure more economic freedom for themselves. Most also repatriate money back to their families. In 2016 alone, remittances to Latin America was measured at over $69 billion, a vital lifeline for those that have been left behind. This is not to say that they don't love America, because they do. They love the opportunities and comfort that living here brings. It is just that they also love their patria and hope to return there again. You can love two countries without being a traitor to either. This is the land of freedom, the land of give me your tired, hungry, and poor, land of opportunity. And it seems that the United States now wants to abandon that philosophy. It is so difficult to immigrate to any country, let alone a country that hates you for your skin color, your culture, your being. Yet still they come. From Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Mexico, Puerto Rico, and so many other places. Hurricane Maria damaged Puerto Rico in so many ways, yet still the majority of Puerto Ricans stayed. What does that say about the love of country that they have and how difficult it is to leave? When are they going to be allowed to full access to the American dream that is their birthright? The work of the nonprofit groups Raíces and Catholic Charities and others that are helping the latest wave of immigrants from Latin America is both wonderful and troubling to me. A nation as wealthy, powerful, and large as ours should really be able to handle this on their own. The fact that it takes charity groups to provide care, services, and humanity is a troubling sign, I think, for our nation. I understand we can't accept everyone at once. I understand there are procedures in place that need to be followed. But can't we treat people with respect, kindness, and humanity. The leadership in this country is faulty, and it becomes incumbent on those that care, like us, to step up and fill the void. It's the least we can do. I know we're doing our part, and for that I'm grateful. I know that the people trying to emigrate here are grateful as well. We can't stand by and let our country disintegrate into a country of hate and fear. We are better than that. Changes have to come, and they're not going to come easily. But our faith is strong and our cause is resolute. We can make this country again be that beacon of hope to those who are desperate and lost. We can be that guiding light through the storm. We can make these crossover dreams a reality. I implore you to go out and make it so. Thank you. I will leave you with these closing words from a great figure in American history, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He had written these last words on the day he died, April 12, 1945, to be part of a speech he was to have given the next day. Today, science has brought all the different quarters of the globe so close together that it is impossible to isolate them one from another. Today, we are faced with the permanent fact that if civilization is to survive, we must cultivate the science of human relations, the ability of all peoples, of all kinds, to live together and work together in the same world at peace. The only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. Let us move forward with strong and active faith. Thank you for spending this time here together. Amen. Blessed be and go in peace.